McMaster is a busy place. Each day, thousands work, study, live, and research here. Sometimes, amidst all of this, we assume that groups of people, such as students, are all the same. They're all studying, living in residence, waiting for the bus. What we imagine to be the typical student, staff, or faculty member does not represent the multitude of ways in which we study, work, and research. Our different ways of being can affect access. What comes easily to some can be limiting for others. By planning only for typical modes of participation, we create barriers to access for others who work and study in different ways. We need to think about accessibility not just for the typical faculty member, or staff or student, but for who is actually here and who will be joining us in the future. Accessibility is about thinking systematically. It entails in-depth and ongoing consideration of how we make life, study, and work at McMaster possible for everyone. Accessibility is a process. It's a way of identifying and removing barriers to full participation. It's an approach to how we think about McMaster University and our shared places within it. Accessibility is also about making concrete change when barriers are identified. Some might describe this as actually leveling the playing field, making it possible for all to participate fully in opportunities for education, work, and research, and to take part in social, cultural, and community life. Accessibility is about creating opportunity, being flexible, and supporting diverse ways of thinking and acting. Accessibility is not simply about tolerating, but about valuing and celebrating people who are different from ourselves. Accessibility is a broad concept. Here we focus on accessibility as it relates to disability, or on improving access for people with disabilities. This doesn't mean that disability is the only way to think about accessibility, or that disability can be considered entirely separate from other aspects of our identities. What do we mean by disability? The term disability is often used to describe an impairment. This way of thinking presumes that disability is a quality of a person, something that is inherent or inside of someone. This belief forgets that people are embedded within a society, culture, or university, and fails to acknowledge how this might create disability. Instead of placing it in or on particular people, let's imagine disability as existing when people who have impairments encounter barriers to environments or experiences that have been designed only for those who are without impairment. When people do encounter barriers, they often seek accommodations to break through or navigate around them. Accommodations are a way for staff, students, and faculty to be included in places and activities that are otherwise inaccessible to them. While they help to include people with disabilities, accommodations themselves are sometimes mistaken for accessibility. Actually, accommodations are band-aid solutions. They indicate the presence of barriers and typically don't remove them. Improved accessibility will result in fewer barriers and fewer accommodations. People often express concern about whether an accommodation, or accessibility in general, will decrease the rigor of our work at McMaster. We might ask, will accessibility erode the value of academic activities? Will our qualifications become meaningless if the university becomes more accessible? The answer to these questions is a resounding no. Accessibility does not mean that there will be no evaluations of the quality of our work. The hope, instead, is that it becomes one of the key ways in which our work is judged. With this in mind, we can certainly expect to see some changes. Scholarly materials will need to be produced in accessible formats, spaces will need to be made accessible, and work practices may change. Fortunately, a great strength at McMaster is our ability to learn and adapt our understanding and practices as we encounter new ideas. It's important to note that planning for access supports everyone. Think about how much easier it is to push a cart up a ramp rather than stairs, listen to a podcasted lecture on the bus or at the gym, or be able to open a document regardless of the device you're using. And of course, accessibility features aren't just convenient, but essential for full participation. You may be asking yourself, what's my role in accessibility? If you are, you're right in thinking that it's a collective responsibility. This question can help us think about what we do on a daily basis that affects access on campus. Learning to be conscious of our usual modes of operation can help us identify ways in which we can contribute to accessibility. Another great question to ask is, how do I create barriers? It's easier than you might think to create barriers in our regular workflow. For example, the fonts, colors, and words that we use in our handouts or presentations can have a big impact on their accessibility. Making small changes to our work habits can facilitate easier access for everyone. And this is just one simple example of how routine practices unintentionally create barriers. The way we configure spaces like classrooms or offices and set policies are other ways that we can inadvertently exclude others, and there are many more. So what would an accessible McMaster look like? Let's envision a university that has policies, practices, and people in place to identify and remove barriers. We'll notice that there are multiple ways of working, studying, living, and being on campus. New ways of teaching or researching will be met with curiosity and a commitment to prioritizing quality over uniformity and familiarity. In our classrooms, workplaces, outdoor, and social spaces, it'll be common to see diverse populations represented amongst faculty, staff, and students. Moreover, facilitating accessibility will be part of our daily lives, something we all do. Supports for students, staff, and faculty will continue to be available to provide some specific accommodations, but demand for services will be eased simply because fewer barriers to access will be encountered. Excitingly, McMaster will be identified as a research-intensive, student-centered, and accessible institution. We'll attract strong and creative students, scholars, researchers, staff, and community partners. Importantly, it will be a place where full access to opportunities to study, live, work, research, and celebrate is common and expected. Accessibility becomes our norm, rather than a retrofit. Illustrations for this video were done by Kieran Roy Taylor. The script was written by Marie Vanderkloot and Greg Van Gastel. Narration was done by Greg Van Gastel. Video production by Jim Bell. Consultation and support provided by Beth Marquis, Aishi Musla, Tim Nolan, and Rehana Hirji Kalfan. Thanks to the President's Advisory Committee on Building an Inclusive Community.